Hello, my name is Sarah Redding, and today I'm going to be presenting Human Connection and the Five People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. This is for Honors English 11 Semester B Extension activity. So before we start, I'd like to do a short review of the characters and how these events played out in Eddie's life. So first we have Eddie, the protagonist. He's a lonely old man who worked in maintenance at Ruby Pier. He had an abusive father and he suffered from depression his whole life after his service in World War II and eventually after his wife died. He ended up dying after trying to save a little girl from a roller coaster crash. He meets the rest of these 5 characters during his journey in heaven, and there are connections between all of them, as I will explain. Now we have the Blue Man. This is the first person that Eddie meets in heaven, and Eddie inadvertently caused his death. You see, when Eddie was a child, he chased a ball into the road, and a car that was driving slammed on his brakes. The driver of this car had a heart attack and died. So the driver of this car was obviously the Blue Man, and Eddie did not mean to kill him. Then we have the captain. This is the second person that Eddie meets in heaven. It's his old army captain, who both shot Eddie to get Eddie to leave a fire and sacrificed his life for the whole platoon. He stepped on a landmine so the van of soldiers behind him wouldn't have blown up. Then we have Ruby. This is the third person that Eddie meets in heaven. She is the namesake of Ruby's Pier. And the lesson that Eddie learns here is that letting go of hatred is amazing. Eddie learns that his father had actually saved his wife from a drunken rape by his friend Mickey. His father's death is caused by his own heroic actions saving Mickey from drowning after the attempted rape. Next we have Margaret. This is the fourth person that he meets in heaven. It's his late wife, who was the only happiness that he had ever known. Margaret is content with her life, only lamenting the fact that they never had children. Eddie apologizes to her for never making more of himself and keeping them at the pier. The fifth and final person that Eddie meets in heaven is a Filipino girl that Eddie accidentally killed in the fire during the war. This is the fire that Eddie was pulled out from by his captain. Eddie makes up for her death every day as he keeps the children safe on the rides, and then ultimately as he sacrifices his life for the little girl. This is a little order of the events that happened in the novel. They are not in the order that the book presents them, but in the order that Eddie actually lived. First we have Ruby's Pier was made by Ruby's husband for her. Eddie's father abused him for his entire childhood. Eddie spent his summers at the carnival/amusement park, and his ball rolled into the street, which killed the Blue Man. Eddie joined the military. Eddie tried to save someone from a burning building, but his captain drew him out, which killed Tala. The captain sacrificed himself for the platoon, which saved Eddie's life. Eddie works at Ruby Pier in maintenance. Eddie is friends and co-workers with Dominguez, and Eddie marries Margaret. Eddie's wife Margaret dies. Eddie dies saving a little girl after a roller coaster crash. Eddie begins his journey in heaven, and finally Eddie's legacy continues with Dominguez's help. The first set of connection in this novel is unknown connections. So all the characters within the novel are connected in unexpected ways, even when their lives are separate and they don't ever meet on Earth. There will be others for you too. Some you know, maybe some you didn't, but they all crossed your path before they died, and they altered it forever. The Blue Man says this on page 35. So, a few unknown connections. The first one is the Blue Man's cause of death. Eddie's ball rolled into the street, causing his heart attack. And then we have the shadow from the war. The shadow Eddie tried to save and killed was the little girl Tala. He thought about her all the time, and she led him to heaven after his death. Ruby Pier's origin. The amusement park where Eddie worked all his life, Ruby Pier, was built for Ruby by her husband. Ruby feels connected to Eddie, and she was present in the shared hospital room when Eddie's father died. And after Ruby died, she watched Eddie from heaven and feels connected to the pain Eddie and others experienced at Ruby Pier, as she feels responsible for the park's existence. All of these people impacted each other without even knowing it. So these connections, they all affected one another, but they were unknown, as they didn't know what happened, or they didn't know who happened, who's watching over them, etc. Next, we have after-death connections. Connections made in life remain after death, through memory as well as the connection between heaven and earth. The narrator says, "Lines formed at Ruby Pier, just as a line formed somewhere else. 5 people waiting, and 5 chosen memories for a little girl named Amy or Annie to grow and to love and to age and to die and to finally have her questions answered. Why she lived and what she lived for." A few connections that are after-death connections is when Margaret says to Eddie, "Lost love is still love." Margaret tells Eddie this in heaven. Eddie was severely depressed after she died, and some comfort that Margaret gives Eddie is that their connection wasn't severed, it was just transformed. Secondly, Eddie's trauma from his abusive father. Eddie's father was a violent, misogynistic alcoholic who worked a low-paying job as head of maintenance at Ruby Pier. He neglected and abused his children, and as a child, Eddie was neglected and only praised when he was in a fight, won a baseball game, or fixed equipment at the maintenance shop. This man represents extreme male aggression and toughness. Eddie lives with the only bad memories of his dead father and tries not to follow his example. Finally, Eddie's legacy via Dominguez. After Eddie's death, his co-worker Dominguez continues to spread good tales about the old man on Ruby Pier who used to fish out the back. Memories live on in people's head, good and bad. So these are human connections after somebody died. The connection can be transformed like his and Margaret's love, or it can be in the form of like an example of what not to do from Eddie's abusive father. Part 3 is needed connections. If everyone is connected, then almost any action could cause suffering to someone else, but one's own suffering is also a necessary part of helping someone else. These connections are like sacrifices. Sacrifice is a part of life. It's supposed to be. It's not something to regret, it's something to aspire to. Little sacrifices, big sacrifices. The captain on page 93. Needed connections. The captain's death. So, the captain died after saving Eddie's platoon. His sacrifice made it possible for the soldiers to continue fighting and hopefully return home. The captain says, "Sometimes when you sacrifice something precious, you're not really losing it. You're just passing it on to someone else." Next, we have the Blue Man's death. The Blue Man sees his death as a sacrifice to let Eddie live out his life. If the Blue Man had kept the car going, or hadn't had the nerves to react like that, which caused his heart attack, he might have hit Eddie and killed him. Finally, is more unexpected connection is the captain's version of heaven. The captain's heaven is the peaceful version of the battlefield where he died. The captain thinks that heaven means knowing his earthly sacrifices led to peace and new life for others. Each character here died saving another person in hopes that it would positively impact them. So even though the captain died and his life was over, and the Blue Man died and his life was over, they both did it so Eddie could have a greater future. In conclusion, humans are connected whether they know it or not. For example, the Blue Man died because of Eddie's ball in the road, and Eddie had no idea. Secondly, humans are connected even after death through memories and legacies. For example, Eddie's legacy lives on through Dominguez telling others. And finally, humans are connected through the sacrifices they make for each other. For example, the captain helped his entire platoon survive by stepping on the landmine himself.